Hi there, folks, from ADPR 451. This is our video and slides for the week about persuasion. And sorry, it's taken me a little bit of time to get these up, but this will be geared towards helping you for your assignment for the week, which is a persuasive appeal letter. And so I'll talk about that at the end of these slides here. So want to set you up with some of the important things to think about really in combining the two sort of readings that you had. You had reading chapter 2, which was becoming a persuasive writer, and then part of chapter 16, and I would really just go ahead and read the whole chapter 16 to get the whole sense of things, but I forget exactly what the details are about chapter 16, but it's just reading through really the direct mail piece because that's what your assignment is for this week. So it's a persuasive appeal letter. Like I said, we'll talk more about that towards the end of the slides here. But in thinking about persuasion, this is really at the core of what public relations does, along with establishing mutually beneficial relationships. Persuasion is really sort of the second pillar, if you will, of public relations. And so, obviously, when we try and persuade someone, we try and influence them. We provide information and data oftentimes to do what we see as enhancing relationships with particular publics that are important to us or to the organization that we work for. And there is a section in chapter 2 about making sure that in crafting persuasive messages, in working in this area of persuasion, that it is important to make sure that you're always following some good ethical guidelines. The Public Relations Society of America does have some ethical codes that if you continue on in public relations, you really should become aware of and familiar with. And there's a lot of work in the area of PR ethics. Fundamentally, however, it's really important that you have as a part of the way that you do business or the way that you practice public relations, that you don't mislead or deceive or even manipulate your message or other people. So be aware of that, that is something I would say we see a lot of examples of that not being followed in public relations. That's a whole nother topic, but it is something to be aware of when you're talking about and learning about becoming a persuasive writer and becoming a public relations expert or professional. So if you think about public relations professionals and what do? Well, they do all kinds of different things, as you can see on this image here over on the right. Communication, provide information, you can do it in corporate, you can do it in communities, do all kinds of different things. But fundamentally, public relations practitioners really are responsible for creating messages that try and persuade people, get people to change their attitude or their opinion, or reinforce existing predispositions or opinions or attitudes. But quite often it's to influence people to either buy something or use a service, use something, or support a worthy cause. And we'll talk here in a little bit about supporting a worthy cause and fundraising and development. That's an area that is growing in public relations and supporting fundraising, that type of thing. So chapter 2 starts out talking about rhetoric and the importance of rhetoric in sort of the beginning of public relations, and then talks about ethos, logos, and pathos. And I thought it would be important just to call those to the front of mind when combining some of this information from these two chapters to prepare you for your assignment. And remember that the concept of ethos is really about the credibility of the source, and so that's always something to think about in public relations when you're creating messages. And then there are two sort of types of appeal, either appeal to reason with a logical argument or appealing to emotion with a pathos type of argument or message. So think about it that way. So I want to show you just some examples of the types of appeals in each of these categories. We'll leave the source credibility aside for a second because that's, for the day, because that's a whole different topic. But we'll talk about logic and then we'll talk about emotional appeals here. And I'm going to give you some examples just to give you an idea of the types of appeals that are useful in public relations more broadly. Okay, so the first one is the appeal to logic, right? Get a flu shot, you can protect yourself, you can protect those around you. Sorry for the Spock reference, but I thought you might appreciate a little chuckle there. But here's another one, appealing to reason with data as an argument of there's a lot of sugar in these things, and so you shouldn't eat them. Okay, information and logical appeals illustrates a need, and then how that need is either being met by your organization or how it's not being met by a particular organization. So if you see here, these particular companies are not meeting people's nutritional needs because there's too much sugar, that type of thing. So an example of if you think about using a logical appeal, so if the need was to raise money to move a school, if a school needed to move to a new property, say it was a private school, and then how the need is being met by the organization would be providing some evidence, some data to support that. Okay. The second kind here is emotional appeals, and emotional appeals generally show the things on effects on individual people or groups of people, groups of people even. So examples like these, a gift that saves lives to Doctors Without Borders. Here's a Michelin ad, so much is riding on your tires. The implication here is that you want to protect your children, to protect your babies, and it's really important, therefore, that you have tires that are safe or that are the best when you're driving. Another example here over here with the Syrian children donation advertisement, and then a smoking advertisement here. Some of the things about emotional appeals, they build support through relationships. They allow people to sort of bond over or feel a part of giving to this emotional appeal. If you think about social media, sometimes when people ask to be connected to you on social media, and you don't know the person, it's not as powerful an appeal, it's not as powerful a connection as when you have, this is a person that you're already friends with, okay? And then there are a lot of opportunities for cross-promotion using emotional appeals. So just some, like I said, some general information. The most effective appeal, however, is this idea of a combination appeal. And I would recommend that you take a look at this video, either pause this now and watch this video, or you watch it later on. But it's a great example of a combined appeal of both logic and emotion. What they do is they talk about, they actually have to move a school. This is a private school in, I believe it's New Zealand. And this video does these two things really well. It talks about the emotion of being in the current location, but then it also talks about the optimism of the future in moving the school. But then it also appeals to logic and reason, and it talks a little bit about the things that they're already doing to raise money to move this school. And then they also ask for money to help move the school, so donations and things like that. So the idea is that they combine both a logical appeal as to what they're doing to raise money, and then an emotional appeal as to what are the positive, what really makes this school special and worth your donation. So it's an interesting video to take a look at. So as you can see, again, there's three I wouldn't say three types, there's really two types of appeals and then one combination thereof. So you can see how all those kind of contrast. Okay, so in terms of looking at the structure of a message, how messages are put together and what you need to be thinking of, and this takes some of the content from both the persuasive chapter and then also the direct mail chapter. But making sure that when you create a message, especially a message that is intended to out and out persuade, meeting an audience member's needs is what's most likely to get the attention of that audience member. Answering the "what's in it for me" implied question is really going to help you get that person's support. In creating messages, you want to be wary of negative emotions like fear or guilt. These things can often cause message avoidance. And if you've ever seen one of those ASPCA animal advertisements on television, or some of them Save the Children, where they really play on some of the negative emotions, the feeling terrible or guilty about the plight of these animals that are being treated very badly, or these children that are starving in a foreign country where there's a lot of war and things like that. You have to really be careful with those, because sometimes those can cause people to just avoid the message altogether. So that's something to be aware of when you're using the negatives. When you are creating messages to advocate and persuade, you want to think about using both the idea of something that's advocative, but also something that's entertaining, that has an element of humor, because as you can see, there is some benefit in using humor. Although one of the things that the research says is that really humor is more effective in just increasing awareness rather than getting to people to change an opinion or change an attitude or take some kind of action. And so if you're really just looking to get on people's radar, for example, using humor and entertainment can help you. And then that mix of advocacy and entertainment, again, is more effective than just trying to advocate. So things to think about when you're considering structuring your message. The last idea here on this slide is the more you can get your message on a channel that is considered high involvement, the more likely you are to persuade people. So the example here is that television is low involvement, right? You're not doing a whole lot when you're sitting there watching television. But when you are sitting face to face with someone, you are listening to them, but there is all kinds of nonverbal communication and bodily communication, that kind of thing. And that face to face really allows for a much higher level of persuasion. When you think about what the chapter talks about communication, it talks about the communication model, and then it talks about several theories. I'm not going to go through those theories because you can read about them. And if you take ADPR 450, which I believe is the PR theory course, you'll learn more about those. But I do want to hit on some of the or the really, really important elements. When you think about creating messages, you need to think about each of these elements, right? You need to think about the person who's going to receive the message and almost under what conditions that person is going to get the message. Are they going to be doing something low involvement like watching television, or are they going to be doing something that's more high involvement? Always best not to think about the public as one group, but to think about multiple different publics. Think about the people who are invested or involved in the issue or the organization that you're working for. Obviously, the media here is the channel that carries the message that you're sharing. And then the message itself being, what do you want people who are going to get this message to believe, do, think, all of that meaty stuff. And then as the sender, you're considered where the message originates. You're considered the person who creates the message. So you've probably seen this before. This is the Shannon-Weaver model of communication. And if you ever study more communication models, it's a pretty limited model because, as you can see, it's fairly linear, right? It goes from the idea of your sender to transmitting the message via a channel. Somebody decodes the message and then receives it. Here you can have in the middle this idea of noise, which can affect the message that's received. And then you have this idea of feedback, right? So this is one model of communication. And like I said, it's fairly old school, and it came out of a time when messages were being created in a very traditional sense. This does not do a great job of representing communication in our current environment. So if you think about when we communicate via digital, whether it's a website or whether it's using social media, there are other factors that come into play here. So this model is fairly old, but it's a pretty foundational one. So I wanted to just show you an example because I don't think they did that in your chapter 2. So in thinking more about what are some of the factors that you need to think about when you are considering writing in a persuasive way, obviously you want to analyze your audience. That's something you've been practicing this semester as we've looked at who do you need to talk to, who is this message for as you've created different pieces. When we've looked at creating the feature stories for the Nebraska or the College of Journalism and Mass Communications here. You also need to think about where the message is coming from, and is that source, whether it's an individual or an organization, is that going to be credible to your audience? We'll talk about appeals to self-interest in just a minute, but you want to make sure that your message, in order to persuade, appeals to the audience's self-interest in some way or another. You want to make sure, of course, that you're being clear with your message, that you are using the right context to frame your message, that you are timing it right, whether that's time that you share it or release it, or time that it takes to read it. You want to make sure that you don't waste people's time or spend too much time trying to persuade them, because that can backfire. That you're using or not using appropriately symbols, slogans, acronyms that can help illuminate your message and therefore persuade people more effectively. And then there's a couple of things that are pretty cool, at least from my perspective. The idea of using color, and the chapter talks about that, that there are some general meanings that go along with particular colors. For us, a great example here at UNL is the color red. The color red is very meaningful for those of us at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. It is our color. It is very meaningful. But in some of the online systems that we have, there are sometimes buttons that are colored red. I notice this when I advise students. And oftentimes I read that color red on a website, an advising system website. I use that as that's cancel, rather than that's the go ahead button, because that's our color. Because to me, before I came to the University of Nebraska, my general understanding of the color red was a couple of things. One, is often used for stop, right? If you look at stop signs, stop lights, that kind of thing. It's also used to sort of represent or reflect passion or things like that. So you have to kind of be aware that the colors you use may have specific meanings, and you may want to play on that or not play on that in your persuasive writing. And then this last idea is making suggestions or out-and-out calls to action when you're finished, at the end of your message, considering that it's a document or something, making sure that you ask for people to take action, okay? So the chapter also talked about several different strategies for persuasive writing. One of the things they discussed was the use of drama and the human element. Things like statistics, certainly it depends on your audience. Some audiences are much more interested in statistics than others. Surveys and polls, making sure that you use the most of information or data that you have to support or argue against a particular position, or say a piece of legislation, or a particular buying habit that somebody may have that you're trying to get them to change, something like that. Always providing examples is helpful. And then these last three areas, the idea of a testimonial, we see this a lot when we recruit at the college level. And I guess I've been thinking about recruiting and advising today. Those are some of the conversations I've been having, so my mind jumps to that. But in looking at some of the university's recruitment material, what is often effective, whether it's our institution or someone else's, is stories, testimonials from students who have been here and are finishing their degrees and can speak to how wonderful this university is and how the faculty have been really helpful or advising staff have been really helpful. But a testimonial can help very, very effectively in persuasion. Certainly things like endorsements, if you think about celebrity endorsements for, tennis players endorsing certain kind of tennis racket or other similar kind of product. And then the idea here of emotional appeals that we talked about a little bit before. Some pretty effective persuasive writing strategies. And you might think about how you can use those specifically. You don't have to use all of them, of course, but some of them for your assignment for this week. So this is a great chart, and it's actually taken from page 29 in your book, but it's a list of appeals to self-interest. And maybe this will help clarify if you kind of aren't sure what that means. But these are things that if you use this argument almost, if you use this appeal, that these have a fairly, I don't want to say easy, but these are effective in suggesting that people should act or participate or be persuaded by your message. So in looking at these, think specifically about your persuasive appeal letter. Okay, and you're going to write basically a fundraising letter, and we'll talk about it here in just a little bit, but what is going to help you make the argument and persuade people to participate and or donate money? Well, certainly not making money, right? But with another product or service, saying, hey, if you use this, you can make money, you can save time, you can be more comfortable. Those are, for different audiences, effective appeals. For people that are not like me, being cleaner, although maybe it would be effective if it were me to appeal to me to be cleaner, because I'm not the tidiest person, and so if there was something that could make being cleaner easier, combining some of these appeals, that might be helpful. Some of these really hit home. You have to realize that some of these really tap into pretty intense emotions. So things like being loved and accepted, gaining praise, avoiding criticism. Sometimes you can really tap into people's emotions, and you want to be very careful when there are emotions that are very close to people's heart. So there are a great list of suggestions to use. I just wanted to call them out and be sure to have you look at them and consider what can be effective for your own individual assignment this week. Okay, so I said I'd talk a little bit about this idea of fundraising, because oftentimes that's one of the more direct ways that people in public relations have to write in a persuasive manner. Sorry, I had to take a drink of water there. Fundraising is also often called development. So if you ever see a job that talks about director of development or something like that, what they're talking about is fundraising. And essentially, you're interested in increasing contributions, both of groups and of people, to a charity. It doesn't necessarily always have to be a charity, right? The University of Nebraska Foundation, I guess it might be considered a charity. Not entirely sure about that. But again, fundamentally, this is about building relationships. And the area of development fundraising is a big pool. There's all kinds of strategies and information to think about. But some of the different strategies are, holding events, making grants, establishing partnerships to build new buildings. When people have money that they want to give, especially older people, planned giving. If you ever listen to National Public Radio, which I don't know if you do, but oftentimes they have blurbs on there about, we have estate planning information for you, and if you're interested in getting estate planning information, we can also talk to you about how you might do a planned giving or estate planning to give some money to National Public Radio. And then another way is through this idea of storytelling. So I would encourage you to look at the NU Foundation here. There's a lot of opportunities to kind of learn about some of the fundraising strategies that they use to get people to donate money to the university. As you can see, the top of the webpage here, at least when this image was clipped, is not the University of Nebraska Red. So you might think about what the strategy behind that is or isn't. When you think about fundraising, you need to also think about the effectiveness of personalizing messages. And so this goes beyond just fundraising, but fundraising is a great example for it. When you personalize things, people get the feeling that they're needed and wanted. people generally speaking, even when it doesn't have to do with fundraising, people want the opportunity to help. The number one reason people don't volunteer for things is because they are not asked. So be thinking about that in how you might use that piece of information in terms of getting people persuaded or to help you out or to donate. So there's a couple of examples, there's an example here of a personalized thank you gift as a video that is shared for people who donate to Whitmore University. And your book talks about different types of gifts that organizations give people sometimes before they've even donated. Little things or things that are not so expensive, like address labels or other little tchotchkes like that can be an incentive for people to donate. And so sending those out with the ask for the donation can sometimes be helpful. So if you think about what's a blueprint or what are some of the elements for a fundraising letter, well, this first one is something that you don't really have to worry about for the assignment, but in practicality, you do need to make sure that as you're creating any kind of persuasive material, specifically a fundraiser, you're going to want to make sure that your mailing list has correct addresses and addresses of people that you really want to reach, all of that. So you want to make sure you have a strong mailing list. That every way you share that persuasive message or letter, you have a way to personalize the letter to people so that it doesn't go to whom it may concern or the head of the household or things like that. You really want to make sure that you do your due diligence and get the first name and be able to get the name and be able to personalize things. Then when you start the letter, you really need to make sure that you use, and I think your book talks about this, using the lead, like considering the first sentence or the first short paragraph of your fundraising letter as an actual news lead almost, and grab the reader's attention with that information. Then you go into explaining what the need is and providing an example that really humanizes the challenge or the problem that your organization works on or works with. So, for example, if you're thinking about Doctors Without Borders as your organization trying to create a fundraising letter, you would talk about the need for money for medical supplies, for example. And then you would provide a short story or a humanizing example where where there was a situation where your organization was able to provide medical care in a refugee camp or something like that. So you want to provide an example that is really about humans and tells a little bit of a story and gives a real example. You also want to make sure then after you've given that example that you illustrate that your organization, so think about Doctors Without Borders, really has the ability to address this need. And one of the things, I'm not all up in Doctors Without Borders, but I think about them a lot because I'm not that kind of doctor, and so I can't participate in that. But I do think that what they do is pretty remarkable. One of the strengths of Doctors Without Borders is the network that they have, the international network of doctors and aid organizations on the ground in countries where help is needed. And so that might be something that you choose to talk about in a fundraising letter for that organization. How does your organization have the ability to address this need, to address the problem? It's not necessarily to fix the problem, right? The problem might continue. But how does your organization address this need and be able to meet the need to some degree or another? Okay. Then you also need to make sure that you have a specific call to action, that you ask for what you want your reader to do. You also then talk about the benefit to you doing this is X, Y, Z. And then you can also think about including the consequence of not responding or not donating. Always, at least from my perspective and what I've seen in terms of letters that I get, a suggested donation amount is helpful. If an organization sends me personally seeking a donation and they don't provide a suggested donation, it sounds silly, but it's hard for me to think about budget-wise what can I afford, what would be helpful to them. To go through that mental process is kind of, when I'm opening up the letter at the end of a long work day, I'm looking at my mail, it's a challenge. So if you say in a letter, $25 or even $5 is a suggested donation, and this is what we can do with that particular donation, that's going to be much easier for people to react to and respond to. Making it easy for people in terms of mental energy to expend when you're trying to persuade them is definitely something you want to aim for. So then you want to clearly say, how can you do this? And so your book talks about the different ways you can provide opportunities for people to respond. So you can provide a response card that has a postage stamp on it. You can provide a form for people to return, and then an envelope in there for them to return it with a stamp already on it, or postage paid, or whatever. But you want to think about clearly how do they enable people to take action, is I guess what I should be saying. Want to make sure that at the end of the letter you are genuine in saying thank you for, essentially reading this message and making a donation. It's important that you act. And then it's important to include a postscript, a PS, with a piece of information that illustrates, again, a reason to act, and a reason to act quickly. Act now. We are doing, there's a drive where our dollars are getting matched dollar for dollar by another organization or something like that. So, acting today as opposed to in a week can really make a huge difference. Okay? So, as a sort of a checklist of things that you want to make sure that your letter has, this is a pretty great slide. And just a little bit of amusement here. Do you support putting kittens on Mars? Yeah, that's my jam. Well, I work at Space Kittens International, and we're collecting donations. Do you want to donate? Well, yes, I do, because you're hitting the nail right on the head. That's my jam. I was trying for humor there. I guess it didn't work. Okay, so I want to talk briefly about your persuasive appeal assignment. I would go ahead and pull up that assignment and have it next to you as you look at this and listen to this. You want to make sure that you, again, use a strong lead, as we discussed. The purpose of the organization is clearly stated. If you're asking for money or time, whatever. You use a humanizing example. These are all under things that you're going to be graded on. So it should be towards the end of your assignment, or maybe on the back side if you've printed it out, or on the second page. You want to illustrate a humanizing example, and again, show the organization as the solution to the problem. There are a couple of examples, I think, in your book that might be helpful to you. If I can find a couple of good examples before the end of the day today, I will add those to our links and everything on our modules page on Canvas. But you can see here you need to make sure that you have a benefit to the reader. Why should they participate? A call to action. A reply mechanism that's easy to use. You don't obviously have to include a postcard or include a letter or an envelope or something like that, but you do need to refer to it. And then if it's not clear from the text of your letter, you can write me a little note and say, I would include a form for people to fill out and a self-addressed stamped envelope kind of thing. Okay? Make sure your writing is clear and that you properly edit, not edits, your copy, and that you are specifically writing to the target audience, and that, again, on the assignment sheet itself, you do need to complete the strategic message planner. And so there's a description there of the objectives, the strategy, the tactics, and so forth. So you do need to complete that and make sure that your what you write is really tailored for the target audience and the appropriate objective the objective that you've set out. Okay, and then you can see there about the PS about on the letter as well. Okay, so let me know if you've got questions about that. Again, the intention here with this set of slides is to really combine the persuasive writing strategies from Chapter 2 and then the direct mail pieces that have to do with creating a good direct fundraising appeal letter to help you complete that assignment for this week. Okay, so if you have questions, please get in touch with me. I'd like you to have this done by Sunday, but if you don't have it done until our class next week, that's fine. Please recognize that we are coming up towards the end of the semester, so I don't want you to run into the problem of, oh, well, I didn't do this week, and so I'm going to let it go or whatever, because it is worth 50 points. So I do want to make sure that you have this on your radar, that you do get it in, so that we can get it graded. And if it's something that you want to use in your online portfolio for our final project, that you have an opportunity to turn it in, make sure that you get feedback from me, and then include it in your online portfolio. Okay?